There are still lunches available, so. Today we're here to discuss the Small Business Administration and its role in promoting manufacturing. And to kick us off, we have Congresswoman Haley Stevens from Michigan here today to give a little rah-rah manufacturing for us. So everyone welcome Haley Stevens.
Well, good afternoon, happy lunch hour. It's great to be back from August recess. I'll just give you all a snapshot. Being a newly elected member of Congress serving the first term, I now finally feel like a member of Congress, having done the August in-district work period. And just so supportive of this caucus and the committee staff, the House member staff that are part of this caucus, as well as the leadership that Congressman Ryan and Reed bring to this endeavor. I happen to represent a district in southeastern Michigan that is home to the country's most robust automotive supply chain. So these guys are like a dime a dozen in my district, but proliferating such incredible technologies and innovations, and it's really inspiring. And at the beginning of my service, I decided to launch an initiative called Manufacturing Monday. And so on Fly Out Mondays, I go and I see a manufacturer, I go and see maybe a training center on occasion, but it's really that time with those small and mid-sized manufacturers that's been so informative to my work as a member of Congress, and also just being able to kind of tinker around alongside with them and give them some airtime with me as their member of Congress, just about to go back on that plane to come back here and vote and do the work that we are doing either in committee or as part of our larger body. But we're also here today, I think, to talk about the reauthorization of the Small Business Administration. It's a little bit long overdue, and how that intersects with us in the manufacturing sector. And you guys know the data, you know the facts, that 99.5% of manufacturers are small businesses. Roughly 75% of them are, employing under 20 individuals. And I see these guys every day, right? When I'm back in my district, they're the people who, live and work in a district like mine and propel the engines of Midwestern economies that I care so much about. But one of the things that I've been working on in Congress, and this is as a member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, a subcommittee chair for Research and Tech, how nouveau to have this big House majority, this new majority of Democrats, 18 of us who have the privilege of holding a gavel. And let me just tell you, I have so much fun with that gavel. I love holding that gavel. I've chaired over 10 hearings. We did the American Manufacturing Leadership Act, which was reauthorizing the Manufacturing USA Institutes and catalyzing some of the interagency efforts. And that's really, I think, what some of the programmatic efforts that we have put into place for small businesses, for our manufacturers on Small Business Innovation Research Awards, the Small Business Technology Transfer Awards, and that's a piece of legislation that we did in a bipartisan way. We said, okay, you know what, we're gonna do that piece of legislation that will reauthorize our SBIRs and our SSTTRs and kind of get that going. And then knowing that it exists in this NSF, the SBIRs across about 12 different agencies, but we want to see that proliferate in our SBA. And we want to take a look too, and I got to read this statistic because I don't have it fully memorized, but I love it. So since the Small Business Administration was last reauthorized in the year 2000, manufacturer R&D in the U.S. has nearly doubled, rising from $132 billion in 2000 to $252 billion in 2017. So the opportunity is upon us, and we're always looking at China, right? Like, oh my gosh, China's R&D spends are X, and, it's like, well, our economy is set up the same way as China, and, our own companies do their investment in R&D, but we want to look at that early stage funding, especially what our SBIR funding provides for 1, 2, and 3, and what that catalyzes for new businesses or researchers looking for that basic research funding that'll ultimately end up creating a new technology, connecting into a broader piece of our manufacturing sector. So the race is upon us, and I think the enthusiasm and the energy for manufacturing is also here. Just to give you a snapshot of what I have seen in my district after 8 months of doing these manufacturing Mondays, I've lost count, but it's been dozens and dozens and dozens. And the thing is I don't even have to solicit them. Like, these companies are reaching out to me and they're like, come and see us. And so this is companies like Rivian that are doing electric vehicle technology, or Next Year that's doing all this incredible R&D into the engines of automobiles. We are living through an innovation renaissance, and I want to be very Michigan specific here, because the question that I implore of my colleagues when I'm on the House floor, just spending way too much time in the science committee, is what are these future innovations? What are these moonshots for the next 50 years? As in mid-July we celebrated that 50-year mark from the landing on the moon that was propelled by the great vision of America and our leadership and our technology talent and our engineering talent, although it was just a smidgen of what goes into the iPhone today, right? So they did it with a lot less technology. And it's squarely, I think, what we're looking at in manufacturing. It is the manufacturing economy stupid, right? That is the political mantra. And for those of us in Michigan and in the Midwest that are so connected into what we're doing on electric vehicles, the plight to zero emissions, the plight to zero fatal accidents, this is an innovation renaissance. And it's really quite remarkable how these small businesses, how these collective engineers and innovators and entrepreneurs, these folks who after the 2009 recession just rolled up their sleeves and said, you know what? We're not going to let the world write us off the map. We're going to continue to do what we do really well. And now in my district, I've got 75% of the R&D alone in autonomous vehicle technology. And they're besting every obstacle, because we know they got some obstacles in their face right now, but they're doing it because of a commitment to the broader trajectory of this industry. And so we want the good and effective federal stewardship, and you guys are it. Like, you're the group here today that's going to be talking about a topic that's going to influence innovators and districts and regions in the Midwest and all throughout the country for decades to come. So thank you for your shared commitment and vision for manufacturing and prosperity and job growth, and what has propelled the engines of our economy from generations beyond to generations to come. Really, really appreciate your dedication, and thank you so much for having me here today. I want to get to introduce who's next. I'm going to stay for a little bit because you guys are so great, but I've also got, can I call out Casey in the back? Casey Denoye is my senior policy advisor, and she handles my science and technology and manufacturing portfolio. So please make friends with Casey, because we're really moving. And I told all my colleagues in freshman orientation, I'm co-president of the freshman class with the Dems, and we work great with all the freshman Republicans. And we were doing our orientation, and everyone got a minute to introduce themselves and say their story. And everyone was saying, oh, bipartisan, and we want to do bipartisan. I go, forget it. I'm not saying bipartisan. I'm saying manufacturing, innovation, and workforce development. And if you want to work on those things, call me. So that's how we're doing it in the Stevens office. So thank you all. Thank you guys.
Wow. I think you might just well wrap there. You taught that. So I realized I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Sam Hammond. I direct the Niskanen Center's Poverty and Welfare Program, and via that program is Struggling Regions Initiative, which has brought us to this topic, because I realized that dealing with poverty and not dealing with economic development were was incomplete. And that brought me, well, to our next speaker, Caleb Orr. Within Rubio's office, I've known Caleb for a few years now. We've worked on everything from the child tax credit to now reauthorizing the Small Business Administration. It's like our lives are working in parallel. So he's going to come up and give a little discussion about the work he's been doing within Rubio, because Chairman Rubio now chairs the Senate Business Committee. They have a kind of internal think tank, which Caleb has been directing, and can tell you about their research and how it's inspired many of the things that have fallen into the reauthorization.
When Sam says that our lives are working in tandem, it just means, like all good think tanks here at the Hill, we just take all of Sam's good ideas and then claim credit for them. Thank you all very much for coming out, and thank you, Congresswoman Stevens. It's a tough act to follow. My name is Caleb Orr. I'm the project director for the Project for Strong Labor Markets and National Development at the Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. We need an acronym. We're still taking bids on that. I think what Congresswoman Stevens talked about, I think, is actually really critical to our work at the Small Business Committee when thinking about China. I think the point that China spends much more than the U.S. does on R&D, but maybe that's not the right comparison is really astute because we have different models of development. And in America, I think our model of development is borne out in all sorts of academic literature, the data, and I think just intuitively for all of us, it's small businesses that have been traditionally the drivers of innovation, the ones that try out the new idea, that then can scale it up and are either scaled themselves into a new large corporation or are bought off by a large corporation, or who sell it to the government, and the government implements technology throughout the entire industry. These are all different ways that in the past small businesses have been the drivers of innovation, and I think Congresswoman Stevens pointed out a really strong ecosystem in Michigan and elsewhere that's driving innovation still today. Unfortunately, what I'm going to talk about a bit is I think a broader picture of decline that doesn't necessarily negate these bright spots that we see in some small business ecosystems, but is unfortunately the reality for a lot of large corporations and just the rest of the U.S. economy in general. But first, I want to point out two reports that our project, which is kind of like an internal staff group, the Small Business Committee, has put out. The first, which I'll spend a fair amount of time talking about, is Made in China 2025 and the Future of American Industry. This goes through a list of what some of the moonshot industries are in China, but I think is perhaps more interesting as a kind of mirror image to what the United States is doing, and looking at what the 10 sectors targeted by the Made in China 2025 Industrial Plan for Development are. And the second, which I unfortunately don't have any copies of today, is American Investment in the 21st Century. It's our second report that was released in May, which takes a deep dive into American capital markets and says, where are our savings going? As for the economy as a whole, when you put money in a bank or when you buy a stock in the S&P 500, where is the money going? Where is its end use? And what I'm going to do today is to try and frame things a little bit for Sam, who's going to talk about the policy concepts and the reauthorization, is frame two lessons that we found in both of those reports that I think are provocative. Neither of these lessons I think are especially unique, and hearing them you might find the characteristics familiar, but I think the way in which they are combined and contextualized to, I think, what our assumptions about the economy are will be important. The first is the relative position in the manufacturing value chain between the U.S. and China. I have a quote here from the U.S. International Trade Commission's economic study that was commissioned in 1999 prior to China's accession at the WTO. I think it's important because it's not really sufficient just to demonstrate that China's economy has grown while the U.S. has contracted in important sectors. I think we have to demonstrate, something a little bit more to know the extent of the problem. So this was written in 1999. Quote, the expansion of China's production and trade in labor-intensive manufacturers would likely result in higher demand for capital and skill-intensive manufactured goods in China, thus driving up the world prices for such products, which are major exports from developed countries like the US. So I think here it's kind of clear that the assumption of the benefit to the United States of expanded trade with China was not a kind of categorical win-win, which I think some of the most ardent proponents or defenders of the WTO accession and opponents claim. It was really a claim about value chain position. The US ITC, among others, were saying that China joining the WTO, expanded trade with China, would improve the United States' capacity in high-end manufactured goods. The study goes on to say this really just explicitly. It says that American capital and technology firms would benefit from this trade, and only firms and workers in the textile and apparel industries would be affected adversely. And so the claim that I think we have to evaluate in determining our own development in the period post-China's accession to the WTO is not just economic growth, it's not cheaper imports, or even consumer welfare, which could have been financed by the increased or balance in the American capital account from expanded trade with China, but where the United States stands in high-value, advanced manufactured goods. And unfortunately, that picture is pretty bleak. What we did in this report, in this China report, is that we took the top 30 unit value goods. So if you take what the price that a good is selling at in the entire global market, what the average price is for that good, we took the 30 most expensive goods in the world and looked at the share of the global market between the US and China. Just a few examples of these goods, just to show you that these are not McDonald's toys. We have harmonized tariff line 8411, which is turbojets, turbopropellers, gas turbines. 8462, which is heavy machine tools for working metal. 8501, electric motors and generators. 8601, rail locomotives. And 8705, which is special purpose heavy motor vehicles. So in other words, these require multiple suppliers, require all kinds of capital input to make the highest end of the value chain in the literal terms of price. And in these and the rest of the 30 that we have on our list, China has caught up to the US. But since 2001, the US share of the global export market in these goods declined from 10% to 9%, while China's share during the same period grew from 3% to 10%. According to another measure, which is compiled by the US Census Bureau, in 2001, the US had a $4.4 billion trade surplus in advanced technology products with the rest of the world, and last year we had a $128 billion deficit. It's truly a massive shift. And so while I think that China is the most useful and I think significant mirror for us to look into on this, I think the takeaway is more general, which is that the US is in relative value chain decline when it comes to manufacturing. The second takeaway, I think, provides us a framework to better define this decline and outline some policy solutions. And this it's a somewhat technical term that I'll explain shortly after. The takeaway is that the American business sector is now a net lender of funds to the rest of the economy. What this means is it's a balance sheet term. So think of this as like a single company. How does a company raise money to fund its business? It issues liabilities. So it can take out a loan from a bank, it can sell a bond to capital markets, or it can issue shares to investors. They then are sending out claims for other people to hold in exchange for capital that they can invest. If a company has more liabilities than financial assets on its balance sheet, then we would call it a net borrower of funds. In other words, it's borrowing funds from the rest of the economy to invest in the business. And if a company is not a net borrower, then by definition it has more financial assets than it has liabilities. So financial assets like cash on hand, stock in another company, or a loan that it's lent out to a consumer. If it has more of these than it does liabilities, it's what we call a net lender of funds. And so while for most of American history, the private business sector as a whole, so all businesses, small and large, was a net borrower. In other words, they borrowed money to fund their business. since the turn of the 21st century, the business sector as a whole has become a net lender. And so you might be thinking, I guess, why does this matter for the economy? I think the magnitude really only reveals itself in relation to the rest of the economy. There are reasons why this is a major problem and why we need businesses to be net borrowers. The rest of the economy, the household sector, wage earners, if you're a worker, you earn wages, you put it in a bank. The bank lends it money to the rest of the economy. You're not investing in major capital assets besides maybe a renovation in your home, but that's not a traded good. Banks and other financial businesses are, by definition, net lenders. They lend money to make money. So they're always going to be net lenders. The foreign sector, which participates in our capital markets, buys treasury bonds, they're also a net lender, and we can expect them to be for a while because the net foreign inflows of capital we receive are the inverse of our trade deficit. And as the reserve currency of the world, we can expect our foreign inflows of capital to exceed our outflows to foreign countries for the foreseeable future. But it means that the foreign sector is also a net lender. But not everyone can be a net lender, because for every financial asset there must be a corresponding liability that's backing up an asset. The only sector that's left, whenever we're looking at the economy as a whole, is the federal government. And as we've seen the corporate sector go into net lending status, at the same time the federal government has increased its deficits, which is the definition of federal borrowing. The sum of this picture is that there is no sector that's now investing in the economy on net. And we mean this again in very broad terms. What we've seen really since the turn of the 21st century, and I think this coincides with the exact same China data that we've just laid out, is that businesses are now more likely on balance to earn money by lending funds than by investing them in capital development, physical assets, machinery, factories, etc. Again, this does not preclude any bright spots, and there are many great stories in Florida and Michigan and elsewhere of success, especially among small businesses. But where it counts in the numbers, the large businesses and the bulk, the norm, this has just not been the case. And so I think these two are intertwined. We've become less competitive in our own innovations ecosystem and our own capital development. At the same time, other countries, including China, have become more. And so what we're aiming to do, and these are really the problems we're trying to solve with the small business reauthorization, is we want to use the tools of government, to use policy and law, to induce businesses to send more of their money, more of the funds that they've issued and raised from the rest of the economy, and sink those into capital costs. We want to put them in the real economy, put them in places where workers are working, workers are using machines, repairing machines, and becoming more productive with those machines. And we hope make the rest of the economy look more like the places in Michigan that Congressman Stevens was talking about. And we have a number of programs that we're looking to reform to do that. Some of them you may all be very familiar with at the SBA. The SBA, little known fact, if you count the SBA as a private bank, it would be the 13th largest bank in the United States. It issues loan guarantees, so these loans that they're guaranteeing aren't technically on their balance sheets, but they do have all kinds of liabilities to the rest of the economy. And so, in some small way, what we hope to do is to use the lending authority of the SBA to set new conditions on those loans, to make new loans with these conditions, that businesses take the capital, invest it in innovation and in the physical economy. I totally agree this should be a bipartisan goal, and I think we have an example here with Chairman Rubio undertaking this reauthorization in the Senate, and we look forward to working with everyone in the House and the Senate to get this done. So with that, do you want questions, Sam? Or?
Yeah, I think there's a few questions.
Okay, great. Open floor.
I'll throw it out there.
Sure.
Obviously, Chairman Rubio is the chairman of this into it. One reason why he's focused on this issue, but what are some of the broader reasons why he was drawn to manufacturing, promotion?
Yeah. Well, so there's been a kind of a manufacturing renaissance in Florida, as there has been in other kind of Sunbelt states. We've had a few what are called micro manufacturers that have come to Florida, and so we're seeing that, I think, at a very basic level, seeing some of the same innovations that the Congresswoman was talking about. At the same time, the Senator is really focused on China, and it's one of those things where the longer that you stare and the deeper that you stare into the abyss, the more you come back, I think, looking for constructive ways to help the United States compete. So I think the Senator definitely sees this as a geopolitical competition, and that this is a really critical element to that.
Can you talk a little bit about the SBIR program and how the American government is investing in innovation and supporting manufacturing growth?
So as many of you may know, the Small Business Innovation Research Program, otherwise known as SBIR, is kind of like the government's VC in some ways. It has agencies set aside a certain portion of their research and development budgets to spend on small businesses. It has a pretty long track record of success. There's a number of major companies that you see today, including Apple and IBM, that had some of their initial technologies funded by SBIR grants. The chairman's mark and the SBA reauthorization doubles the set-aside, the allocation for SBIR. So we think that's a critical part of the innovation ecosystem. Great. Thanks very much.
And as I go through this presentation near the end, when we do questions again, the reauthorization of the finally, what are some of the biggest ideas of how to just massively lean into that component of the SBA. So what if I told you that all the trends, all the big structural trends that everyone talks about these days, on the right and the left, from stagnant productivity and median wages, to declining business formation and business dynamism, to rising wage inequality, urban inequality, decline in rural areas, and things like falling share of labor income, we're all conceivably, you can tie all those trends to the trends in manufacturing and small business creation since 2000. This is what I consider the kind of Exhibit A. What you're seeing here is essentially firms by businesses by employment growth. So the 90th percentile firms are the firms for whom 90% of other businesses have less fast employment growth. And when we talk about small businesses and the importance of small business to employment and productivity, what we're really talking about are these really fast-growing firms. It's not exactly small so much as young or new businesses that are under 5 years old, that because they're brand new, they've adopted a new innovation, a new technology, they enter the market and rapidly scale up. And these firms are what drive most of the new technologies in the country, and also most of the employment growth. But what you're seeing here is the 90th percentile subtracted by the 10th percentile. What that means is the fastest growing firms, the like unicorns in the economy, are becoming more, they look more and more like the kind of laggard firms. So they're becoming less exceptional. And that's a problem. And if you notice, there's a bit of a secular decline, but it really starts to fall off a cliff, again, right around 2000. And this just shows the difference between fastest growing firms by age. So that gap between the mature line and the young line, young firms are under 5 years old. They are the source of massive employment growth in the economy, and the fact that they are declining since the 2000s is worrying. So this has been called the loss of skewness. And skewness is a technical term, but it just means when you have a normal distribution that's skewed, it's leaning in one direction. So this is the norm for all the 20th century. Businesses have always had some businesses that are much more productive than other businesses, and a kind of long tail of mom and pop shops and things that are perfectly good businesses, but not sources and engines of productivity. With the decline in skewness, basically the economy is becoming more mediocre, if you will, less exceptional. And that's really worrying for the reasons outlined in some of these other reports. This is just the share of new employees. Share of employees in new companies has also been in long-term decline. It's just another sort of data point on the state of the economy. Now this is U.S. manufacturing employment. You've probably all seen this chart before. It nosedives with China's entry into the World Trade Organization at the exact same time when the economy is starting to lose its exceptional firms, exceptional startups. One of the reasons for this is offshoring. It's not simply that businesses, existing manufacturers were lost, it's that they weren't replaced. So, going to what Caleb said, in 1999 they may have predicted that, given the level of economic development of China and the U.S. is more positioned to begin manufacturing high-end goods that we would then sell to China, which is capital poor. That could have been the case. It's, Switzerland and Japan do that, but the United States, it doesn't happen automatically, if you will, because the United States didn't do that. Didn't set up the economic environment for those new firms to be created. What we saw instead was a kind of hollowing out of the American economy. And going to the, connecting back to labor share, the chart for manufacturing employment and labor share of the economy are remarkably similar. People have, tried to argue that declining labor share is due to the uber rich, it's due to declining unionization. There's been dozens of explanations put forward for why labor share has declined. I think one of the strikingly more obvious reasons is manufacturing jobs happen to pay well. And when they disappear and are replaced by low-wage service jobs, the labor share of the economy goes down. And if you think this is just a spurious correlation, here's a study that correlated loss of labor share by industry. And those black dots, the darker dots, are the manufacturing sub-industries. And so it's strongly predictive of the employment loss in manufacturing leads to lower labor share of income. So why has dynamism declined? There's many explanations out there. I was actually just listening to a podcast today with Alex Tabarrok from George Mason University, very libertarian school, and he was talking about his paper. He looked at has dynamism declined because of regulation, and it was very awkward because he found a null result. It was not due to regulation, and he said, well, this is very perplexing. It goes against his priors. But it's partly because the better explanations are to do with these big structural trends. So one of the reasons why we're pretty confident that dynamism isn't declining due to regulation is it's declining across multiple industries all at the same time. And if you expect it to be regulation, you expect that to have some variance between different industries and different kind of regulatory frameworks. But instead, it's affecting the entire economy. And one of the reasons for this is, when those firms were lost during the China shock, we didn't lose our entire manufacturing sector. Instead, we lost many of the smaller firms, the less productive firms. And some of the bigger incumbents either scooped up their resources, grew larger, and with the global market, it became even bigger, which for new entrants in the economy makes it a much bigger moat. So a term that they use in business sometimes, the moat around your competitive advantage makes it much more difficult for smaller companies to break into the global market. So globalization leads to specialization. One of the theories was, again, that with trade with China, we would specialize in high-value capital goods. Instead, we actually specialize in a particular kind of human capital, a 4-year college degree or better. And this has led to many of the things we're familiar with today. If you live in DC, your rent is pretty high. If you live in New York and Chicago or LA, San Francisco, there's been this clustering of knowledge work in major metro areas to the detriment of broadly working class people who have less education and therefore cannot afford the rent when demand surges and supply doesn't respond in turn. And the second factor is intangible capital. This goes with knowledge workers. Knowledge workers have knowledge capital. This can be shown, there's a great book called Capitalism Without Capital. And it discusses how the US economy is increasingly, the share of the S&P 500, for example, is increasingly made up of intangible capital. These are things like branding, intellectual property, software and patents, high talent individuals that aren't really considered an asset. There's something like, you know, when a CEO quits and the company loses a third of its value, this stuff is all intangible. And it's very, very difficult for new firms to get this kind of capital. It also helps explain why businesses have become increasingly like banks. This is something from Rubio's report. You know, being a net lender, take General Electric Capital, one of their, you know, they've been having a lot of problems, but General Electric, you know, used to make your washing machine and stuff like that, and now it has one of its biggest going concerns is basically a hedge fund attached to it. And this is partly what happens when you lean into intangible capital, because you have resources that aren't, you know, it's not a tradable good, it's not a widget or an automobile, instead it's the licensing agreement to use our products, licensing agreements to use our brands, access to our proprietary data sets. And these things, you know, have a place in the economy, but it also means that it sort of accentuates that winner-take-all dynamic. And so this all leads to a lack of investment, or much less investment than we would expect. And just to add here that in addition, the Great Recession, the collapse of the housing market, some of the regulations and actions by the Federal Reserve since then have also harmed small business, because many small business founders use home equity and things like that to launch their business. So just to sum up what I've talked about so far, startup entry is in a long-term decline. The youngest firms are the most productive and high-growth firms, but they have been getting less exceptional over time, especially since 2000. And then this mirrors the collapse in manufacturing employment following the China shocks, following China's entry to the World Trade Organization, and it has manifested in a bunch of trends that everyone talks about, from EPI to the Cato Institute to AEI and Brookings. Everyone's talking about these issues, from stagnant productivity and wages, urban and rural inequality, price of land in cities, and the college wage premium. All these things have, in my view, my thesis, a very common, either a common cause or a common force that's making them all worse. So why manufacturing matters? You know, this is hosted by the Manufacturing Caucus. I'm sure, just like preaching to the choir. There's obvious things like more innovation, middle-class jobs, national security. All those cliches are true. But I'd like to add a few more sort of framings that put a little more meat on the bones, other ways of thinking about why manufacturing matters. So this is a quote from a friend of mine. He's also he works in Hong Kong, Dan Wang. He has a really interesting job. His job is to go around China, studying their industrial policy and writing proprietary reports on it. So he sees this stuff up front. And what he writes is, what happens when we stop the flow of knowledge up the stack? I think that the key weakness in U.S. industrial robotics is instructive. The U.S. has little position in making high-end precision manufacturing equipment. And when it comes to factory automation systems, machine tools, robot arms, and other types of production machinery, the most advanced suppliers are Japan, Germany, Switzerland. I think the reason that the U.S. has little position can be tied directly to the departure of firms from so many segments of manufacturing. How do engineers work on the design of automation systems if they don't have exposure to industrial processes? So what he's sort of like alluding to here has been called the open innovation model. The open innovation model, if you were doing an MBA in the 90s, you would have heard about it. The idea is the U.S. will specialize in the design, the technology, the marketing, everything that requires people from MIT and Harvard to actually do. And then if we need to actually take any of that intellectual property and build stuff out of it, we'll just go to the low-wage country. So this is called the open innovation model. We'll do the innovation on the design and the technology front, and the fabrication front can be done elsewhere. And so this goes to this issue of supply chains. And what Dan is referring to here is this notion that, that this was a very naive model of innovation. That when you have the full stack, when you have the people designing the technology, designing the new designs and schematics, and the people actually fabricating them in the same economic ecosystem, that you actually increase the cycle of technology, you preserve the knowledge of how manufacturing processes work, and you build better products, new ideas, and spin off in industries. And you don't have to read this quote because I have a soundbite here for you. So this is Tim Cook speaking at the Fortune Global Forum in China in 2017. And he's asked, why does Apple source so much of their manufacturing in China?
I think it was about 2 years ago, you said publicly, when you were asked, why do you do so much manufacturing in China? You said, we'd love to do it other places, i.e. the United States, but the sheer volume of engineers in China is greater than any other place we might discuss. Is that basically still the case?
Yeah, there's a confusion about China that, and let me at least give you my opinion. The popular conception is that companies come to China because of low labor cost. I'm not sure what part of China they go to, but the truth is China stopped being the low labor cost country many years ago. And that is not the reason to come to China from a supply point of view. The reason is because of the skill and the quantity of skill in one location and the type of skill it is. Like the products we do require really advanced tooling. And the precision that you have to have in tooling and working with the materials that we do are state of the art. And the tooling skill is very deep here. You know, in the US, you could have a meeting of tooling engineers, and I'm not sure we could fill the room.
So, knowledge processes, and also the type of human capital you have, clearly. I'm just going to, build off his comment and say, we talk about vocational education, apprenticeship and training. It seems to be a promise that politicians make a lot, but it's very hard to know how to do those reforms in the United States. But those things are really critical to preserving that knowledge. You might not know this from his statement about China being home to the most precision tooling engineers, but the U.S. invented precision tooling. The biggest leaps after World War II. We had the largest forgeries. We invented CNC machines and CNC software. Those things, a lot of that was first lost in the 80s when Japan was doing similar industrial policies, and now we've lost quite a bit more to China. The last remaining precision tooling sector that the U.S. is really dominant in is semiconductors, and one of the unfortunate byproducts of that is when you have debates about manufacturing laws, people cite U.S. manufacturing output has actually been up over the last 20 years. Well, when you remove semiconductors, it's not up, it's actually down. But semiconductors are obviously very high value added. But it's not wise, I think, to put all your eggs in that one basket. The second reason manufacturing matters is economic mobility. And I want to put this in a different framing that we already know that manufacturing jobs are good jobs or stable jobs. But when Patrick Bayer and Kerwin Charles were studying the black education gap and the black wealth gap, they were studying both. What they found is over time the black and white income and wealth differences were converging. They were converging from the early 1900s right up until about 1970. And after that, inequality within the black community and within the white community actually started increasing, such that actually there's more income inequality within the African American population than there is in the overall economy. And one of the reasons is going to the same sort of college premium that I referenced. Today, if you're a black, if you're an African American with a college degree or greater, you have been doing very well. But if you have less than a college degree, not so much. And I think when we talk about the manufacturing loss the U.S. has suffered, a lot of the attention gets drawn to the Midwest and to the Northeast, parts of the South. And that's partly because those were the old manufacturing jobs that disappeared. What this research has pointed out is that, right when the black population was catching up to the white population in terms of high school education and educational attainment, that was right about 1970, which is when manufacturing jobs peaked and then started to disappear. So the loss of manufacturing has hurt the African American population just as much as it's hurt the white population and the white working class. It's just been an unseen. It's been the counterfactual. We haven't noticed it because they didn't have the jobs to lose in the first place. And you can see this too in the distribution of upward mobility. The darker the red, so this is your odds of being in the bottom 20% of the income ladder and getting into the top 20%. So upward mobility. And upward mobility is lowest in obviously the deep south. It's basically overlaps the cotton production in the slave states. And I think one of the ways to think about the legacy of slavery is, one way to understand or define slavery is we're using men and women as machines. We're using them as tools. They are a substitute to technology. Why invent a cotton gin when you can just have unpaid labor do the work for you? And the long-term implication of that is the South, and to this day, was put in a trajectory of being a labor-intensive, low-wage sort of economy, and that is one of the deeper legacies of slavery. And to the extent that the northern states diverged from the South, one of the reasons was because they developed technology and manufacturing sectors. And unfortunately, the South, after a rapid catch-up in the early 20th century, has stalled and actually has diverged somewhat from the northern states since about 1980. So let's go now to the SBA's role in manufacturing, now that we have some of the context. Some of this is just common knowledge for this room, but obviously the SBA is a U.S. government agency created by the Small Business Act 1953. The 3 C's, the capital, contracts, and counseling. They support small business capital formation. They, through SBIR and STTR, contract awards to small businesses, and partner with business development centers to do counseling and so on the ground. And as Caleb mentioned, if you take their whole portfolio, $148 billion in outstanding loan guarantees makes it within easily the top 15 biggest banks. So I took the latest data on 7A loans. 7A loans are kind of the cornerstone program of the SBA, probably the biggest loan program by volume. If you just extract the manufacturing sector, over the last, from 2010 to present, they've issued $16 billion in loan guarantees. Venture capital, SBICs, small business investment companies, these work, they're licensed, basically investment companies, managed by professional private managers. They raise private capital, and by investing in eligible small businesses, they're able to borrow from the SBA guaranteed loans, debentures, to leverage more capital into the small business. And about a quarter of SBIC portfolios are in manufacturing. And then lastly, SBIR, STTR programs, which basic research funding, much of that is in manufacturing. So, current shortcomings. Poor measures of performance. So, we hear a lot about SBA job creation, but this should be caveated because SBA job creation numbers are self-reported on the loan application. Let's set aside whether job creation is even the appropriate target. Disincentives to grow. So take one of the subtle things in that changes in the proposed reauthorization. SBA does a lot to support women and minority-owned businesses, but given the way the rules are written, if you're a women-owned business and you are growing your business rapidly and selling shares in your selling stock in your company and so on, at what point do you cross the threshold and you're no longer majority women-owned? And what does that do to your existing SBA eligibility? That's a barrier to growth. We want not just to have women-owned businesses, but for them to grow. And so sometimes these size standards get in the way of that growth. And poorly targeted. So, not all small businesses are created equally, as we saw. There is this skewness to the distributions. Some young small businesses power the economy. They are the source of all new technology and productivity growth and employment growth. And then there's others. So a scholar has described this as subsistence entrepreneurs and transformative entrepreneurs. Elon Musk is a transformative entrepreneur. Someone opening a restaurant is a subsistence entrepreneur. They want to break even. It's a family-owned business. It's totally respectable, honest living, but it's we should be careful to distinguish between those types of entrepreneurship and public policy. And so, I mentioned that since 2010 to present, all the manufacturing categories, every single manufacturing category has received about $16 billion in SBA-backed loans. In the same period, just restaurants have received about $7 billion loans. Limited service restaurants, another $4 billion. Dentists have received $4 billion. Dentists have received about a fourth of the SBA support through 7A as all manufacturing. So just to give you some context, some perspective on the SBA's role in manufacturing, the SBA does a lot for manufacturing, but in perspective, they could do a lot more. This brings us to the reauthorization. Under Chairman Rubio, the Senate Committee on Small Business Entrepreneurship has put together the first comprehensive overhaul of the SBA in 20 years. People have tweaked around the edges over the years, but this is truly a comprehensive reform and designed through bipartisan support both sides of the aisle. And I kind of divide what has taken place, what's in the reform into two baskets, sort of like long overdue modernizations, just stone cold obvious things to do, and this really unique focus on scaling up high-tech manufacturers. So, some of the obvious modernizations, there should be more centralization and contract certification. We should be able to submit things online. We should have ombudsmen for cybersecurity, and small businesses, especially in the high-tech sector, you should know the cutting edge in cybersecurity, especially if we're framing this in the context of a technology race for China. And streamlining applications, deadlines, who has decision authority. There's just a lot in the existing statutes that need to be modernized, and the reauthorization goes through all of that. But today we're talking about manufacturing, so I'm going to break it down like this. In small business innovation, SBIR, STTR, by far most consequential change in this area is the doubling of the extramural research dollars. So, as Kayla mentioned, SBIR right now 3.2% of the budget for agencies like the Department of Energy, DOT has to be used on sourcing or awarding awards to small businesses engaged in R&D. That gets doubled to 6.4, and STTR gets more than doubled. Accelerate award timelines, give a stop clock. If we don't want these companies, especially if we want them to grow quickly, to learn by example from a very slow bureaucratic process. We want them to get things out the door. Doubling contract caps. This is important. Just we want these businesses to not just create new technology, but eventually commercialize them. And if we cap their growth and we cap the amount of contracting they do with the U.S. government, that will always be a barrier to that growth. And then assessing size standards on a longer time frame. So if one of the weird oddities right now, you could be a small business in a procurement contract with the U.S. federal government, and part of their SBA program, and you're doing really well, and your business is growing, and all of a sudden you grow past the size standard in a given year, and if in a 3-year period you've grown too far, well, maybe you want to pull back some of that growth because you might lose your eligibility to contract with the U.S. government. That's kind of perverse incentive. And so extending the time frames where these things are assessed lets companies have more flex, but also gear up to grow out of and grow beyond the hand of the U.S. government. Small business investment. SBICs, as I mentioned, they're sort of like investment companies that are licensed to draw down leverage for investing in small businesses. In this case, one of the really interesting things in the reauthorization is they've defined these advanced manufacturing industries by NAICS codes, the industry codes. And so they've pulled out, I think, the 75th percentile of most R&D intensive sub-industries, like aerospace, computers, machinery, equipment. And they've said, if you're in those sectors, if you do those activities, you could be eligible for additional leverage to the SBIC program and